the public Gemara saying Yisrael, and all the Hastik and all the soldiers come home. The Shlem was taken to the
Amen.
Shalom Yisrael. I'm not saying there's no doubt. Yam Chad and Ren Yem Yisrael. It's against Hashem and Ren Yaakov. Yisrael has a Chamukayesh and Yitzia Yisrael. Yizkar Konu Chesecha ve'Lascha Yidash Nesela. Iten Lechachel v'Avecha v'Chalatzascha Yimale. Neranu B'Shua Secha v'Shem Eloheinu Nidger. Yimale Adonai Kol Mishalei Secha. Ata Yadaiti Ki Yeshia Adonai Mishichel. Yanehu Mishmei Kodshem. B'Gvuras Yesha Imine. Eile V'Rechev Ve'Eile V'Asusa V'Anachnu B'Shem Adonai Eloheinu Nazgir. Hey, Makarav Rafalu, Vanachnu Kamnu Vanasegad, Adonai Hashia, Hamelach Yaneinu, V'Yem Kareinu. Okay, so in the Maimer, we got up to Eis Ches. Oh, let me, someone pass me one of those books. Thank you. What we left off last week was, so the way we understand the mashal of choosing the king over the ministers is could be understood on many different levels. And then we went through from the highest levels to the lowest levels. The lowest level is to say I choose the king, and I don't choose the stars, the sun, the constellations. I don't choose all these things, and which is Avodah Zarah. Of course, those that do choose, and they choose the minister instead of the king, that means they're choosing Avodah Zarah instead of Hashem. And why they're choosing that? Because of all the Gashmizik benefits. What is it on the highest level? On the highest level, it's someone who chooses the light of Hashem, chooses the light, godly light of Atzilus, of Gan Eden, of Olam Haba. He'd rather choose that than connecting to the essence of Hashem. Of course, it's not the ultimate perfect Aveda, but you can't compare these two things. One is at one end of the spectrum, one is at the other end of the spectrum, the lowest. But what he said in the Maimah was, and that's the part where we sort of left off in the middle, is that when things are not perfect on the highest level, ultimately from that, what evolves, that things are also lacking on the lowest of levels. So we gave this story as an example. It's a story which is brought down in the Sikhs. And we'll repeat it again to explain the point that if a person is... there was a person who used to learn for many, many hours a day. And then they said to him that at this point in your life, you're older, you're learning 18 hours a day. It's about time that you relax and you learn a little bit less. So he said that I don't want that because of me, another Yid should, God forbid, go as far as converting to Christianity. They looked at him in shock. What do you mean? So he explained to them what we said last week, that if I do this, then they'll do that. But if I lower my standards here, someone will lower standards there, which means when the standards are lower, everybody lowers their standards. There's two things. One thing is you do this or you don't do that. There's another thing is when standards become lower. When standards become lower, it affects everything and everybody on all levels, which means that if somebody all the way on top lowers their standards, then the person all the way on the bottom, their standards also become lower. This is also another story in the Sikhs, but a story from actual life. Some of you might remember it from Pirkei Avos, when there's a real true story of someone that told me that he had people working for him. They weren't the highest class work people, actually lower class people, very simple, and just working with their hands, that's where they were holding. And one of them says to Rabbi, I'm really a nice guy, Rabbi, I never killed anybody and I was never ever in jail. That's how he prided himself, how great of a person he is. He never killed anybody, was never in jail. Nobody that I know would be proud to be sort of praised by that. You know, this Shabbos is going to have Shabbaton. Parents, imagine I'm going to introduce one of the students. I want to tell you, we have amazing girls here in this school. This young lady was never in jail. She never killed anybody. It would be embarrassing to say that. So how come this person is not only not embarrassed, actually that's what he's priding himself with? What's the answer? The answer is very simple. He lives in a neighborhood amongst people, which is his, I guess, social crowd, that they do end up in jail once in a while, and somebody ends up killing somebody else once in a while. So the fact that I never did that is actually something to be proud of. In other words, if you're going to be living amongst people that are very accomplished in their life in many different ways, you'll never pride yourself with such a thing. So that means that even if I'm not in that place, but when the standards are up there, then I make an effort to be somewhere where which is also a little bit higher. When the standards go down, I don't make that effort to be, I'm very satisfied exactly where I am. He wants to answer Chassid. In Chassidus, starting from Tanya and Maimorim, we learn about such high levels, like our Maimer now. We learn about such high levels. What's the point? We're not holding anywhere near levels like that. Why are we even learning about it? If anything, it only is annoying because you see how far we are from where people were at, and we're not shaykh to be there anyway, so what do we have to even learn about it? So his answer was in Yiddish, of course, but he said, if you know where you should be, it'll help you be where you could be. This is exactly the same thing as this story. If people know they should be at a certain level, that pushes them to be at a certain level. So this person said, I learn 18 hours a day. So everybody else makes an effort to be somewhere in proportion to that. The lowest person on the ladder, he makes an effort to be in wherever he's at. At least he'll come to the Shul or Shari Yom Kippur. And the other person, at least, will just hold on to his Jewish identity. If I lower my standards all the way on top, then it makes everybody else lower their standards. So basically, when there's something on the highest of levels that are imperfection, from that evolves that even on the lowest of levels there can be something lacking, which is not like that chas v'shalom, but it's a result of that, and that's what it says in this maimer, in Ois Tes. So we'll do it inside. Let's do it inside. See the best we can understand. I was planning to do Tes and Yud. And stop over there, and then we will start a new Maimer, which is a little bit easier, down to earth. So Tes is on page 247. So again, Yeshleimar, the Pirush and Nonos of Malko, this last explanation, where he says, I choose the king, Shein writes about Dargis the Kedusha Shalamayla, that he's not passionate. What he wants, his desire is not the levels, but the ba'atzmo is rather Hashem himself. And the other pshat, Ana Nosa Malka Kipshute, the literal meaning, which means that he doesn't worship idols, Shaychem Zelazeh. They're actually related, interrelated with each other. How's that? In other words, what he's going to bring out is that the point that's lacking in the highest of level, the same point, the same principle is what leads the person to the lowest of levels. This love, which is Mili B'Shamayim, She'ein Reitza B'Giluim de Gan Eden, Elabatz Maser. So if he doesn't want Gan Eden and the light of Gan Eden, he just wants the essence of Hashem. Page 248. Av shebegan Eden yishor b'mitziusay b'yilei asogi v'taining v'elikus. If a person connects to that level, which is understanding Hashem's greatness, basically understanding and absorbing the light of Hashem, and then experiencing the greatest pleasure from understanding that light. That's what it means. In Gan Eden, then the Meziv HaShechina, they take pleasure in the radiance of the divine presence, which means they enjoy understanding Hashem, which gives them the greatest pleasure. But if the essence of Hashem is revealed, the person becomes this battle completely. It overwhelms the person completely, which means there's no sense of self that's going to be enjoying an aid. This is just about connecting to the essence of Hashem. Nevertheless, even though in this scenario he loses himself, in this scenario he still is able to maintain his identity and enjoy the greatness of Hashem. But being the Gan Eden is only a radiance of Hashem's presence, and the radiance and the light is ein arech, that's incomparable to Atzmus Esav, to the essence of Hashem. So he'd rather choose the primary than to choose that which is secondary. In other words, the principle of the matter is that when a person connects to the essence, they're losing themselves. When a person connects to the light, which is not so overwhelming, they do maintain their own identity, and they're able to absorb great godly light and enjoy great godly pleasure. That's again on the highest levels. So therefore, what was like the example we gave last time, when we talk about the people who gave up, the people at Kles HaNefesh, they had such pleasure in connecting to Hashem, they didn't want to let go. What was required of them? To let go of all that pleasure and to discontinue whatever they're meditating on, and just to be grounded here in the physical world, which is, everything is concealed. But on the other hand, this were the essences. So they would have to give up their enjoyment and their pleasure for connecting to the essence. So which do I choose? And this is the answer. Being that the essence of Hashem, that's the primary thing, so I choose the essence, even though I'm going to lose all the other things that give me the greatest pleasure. So the principle is, do I give up the primary for the secondary, or do I give up the secondary for the primary? Move on. This is understood that the other person, when he chooses rather the light of Gan Eden, that light is insignificant to the essence of Hashem. But why does he do it? Because of his self-pleasure, so to speak. Again, it's a spiritual pleasure, it's a godly pleasure, but it's still, this is my pleasure, this is what I am enjoying. So he could retain his identity and derive satisfaction from the radiance of the divine presence. So when that happens on that higher level, what this could evolve into is same thing on the lowest of levels. Even though the person knows that getting chayes from these 70 angels of Klippa, it's from a place of the opposite of life. It's not godliness. Nevertheless, he'd rather want that than Kedusha because he's going to have more benefits. Yes, this is Gashmi is a good benefit, that's Ruch is a good benefit. But the principle of the matter is here I lose myself, and here I'm able to retain my identity and get what I need from me. This is a spiritual me, and this is a physical me. Yeah.
I don't know if you just answered this, but is it not that like instead of getting a ray of godliness to be like in front of all of godliness, isn't that a higher pleasure anyways? Like if he were to like, could still be out of some self-interest, let's say, like if he's letting go of this like ray that's not able to get like a
So the idea is when a person connects to the essence and the highest of levels, it's in a sense that he loses himself completely. So there's no me that feels pleasure. If you remember, even in Tanya, it talks about that. If you remember in chapter 10, where it talks about the two kinds of tzaddikim. So it says one type of tzaddik, he's cleaving to Hashem, he's craving for Hashem, because that'll give him the greatest pleasure. And the other, like a person who's thirsty and wants water. The other one doesn't even think about thirst, pleasure. He just wants to connect to Hashem, which means he wants to embrace the essence. And I guess on the highest of levels, if a person goes to that place, then they're not able to retain the person gets lost and overwhelmed by the essence. If I stay further away from the essence, then I'm able to retain my identity and enjoy all the pleasure and absorb that.
So is it about your motivation, of a person's motivation, like to receive pleasure versus just connecting to godliness?
Right. Then big Gashmi is I'm motivated to have my physical pleasure. The Ruchni is I'm motivated to have my spiritual pleasure. But it's at the end of the day, it's about, again, on a very fine level, it's about maintaining or retaining my identity or losing my identity. Like we gave the example last time that if when the Alter Rebbe on Yom Kippur stopped his davening and went out to chop wood, you can't compare what he was experiencing when he was davening in shul on Yom Kippur or what his experience when he's chopping wood. So it means that when he chopped the wood on Yom Kippur to feed somebody food, you give up all that pleasure and all that you were just experiencing.
Do you think that this relates to like our Yiddishkeit in the sense of like chasing things that might give us like spiritual satisfaction versus like doing it just like to do it?
First of all, it has to relate to our Yiddishkeit because everything has to relate to everything.
Right, it's so lofty.
Second of all, in the classes last week, I kept asking, give me examples. Yes. Adar I, let me hear an example. What were you thinking of?
Like I'm thinking of like, let's say you decide you want to go to a shul that has like a lot of singing and a lot of like, you feel really connected that way because they sing like Karl Bach tunes for Kabbalat Shabbat and stuff, and that's really nice if you feel like you connect to Hashem that way. But like maybe the shul isn't like as tznius as like the other places or something, but like they still have beautiful tunes and you feel like you're connecting that way because the music is, making you feel spiritual.
Yeah, it's a good example. There's a lot of things like that I mentioned, that if you compromise a little bit here, a little bit there could be much, much greater pleasure and sometimes even spiritual pleasure. But at the end of the day, am I deviating from the essence? What's the essence in our context? What it says in Shulchan Aruch, what Hashem wants, like the Mincha, the story with the Mincha. I'm going to enjoy something very, very deep. I'll be flying off and understanding deep concepts of Chassidus, but I might be missing the time for Mincha. And that's not as pleasurable as listening to this, but that's what the essence of Hashem wants. The difference is, when I'm doing the Mincha, it's more of Hashem. When I'm having the pleasure, it's more about me. Again, pleasure in what? It's pleasure in Hashem, so it's still Hashem. But there's more of me there, and that's why that overpowers the other way of thinking. The same those people who actually worship idols. Page 250. Either they believe that the stars and the constellations are actually in charge, or they believe that they have some authority, like the waiter, like the marshal of the waiter. And so, by the fact that this person on the highest levels, that the desire for the light overrides the connection to the essence. So he's giving substance and he's giving importance to something which is outside of the essence of Hashem. It's the light of Hashem, but he's giving more importance to that than the essence. Again, from this, it could ultimately evolve that it gives importance to the stars and the constellations as if they have their own ability to make choices. In fact, even to the lowest of levels, that they themselves are in charge of everything. Page 251. Yesh lehosiv, Gam kishir tzeinim began eden mishol gan eden shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When the person wants Gan Eden, he doesn't want Gan Eden just because it's pleasure. Like a person enjoys music, and someone else enjoys his entertainment, and someone else enjoys his food, and he enjoys Gan Eden. It's because it is Gan Eden shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why the Alter Rebbe used the expression, your Gan Eden. Even when I know that it's your Gan Eden, it's still about you, it's about Hashem. Nevertheless, Gam Oz Nevertheless, from that could evolve the mistake that you will think that the stars and the constellations have some choice, or even worse, that they are totally in charge. Because just like here, you're giving substance to things that are outside of the essence of Hashem. So ultimately, what could evolve there, I'm giving substance to forces that are also outside of Hashem, the forces of nature. In order for that, there should be no possibility that the person should choose any of the ministers on any of those lower levels. 252. Every person should be able to arouse within himself, at least in a small scale, and the fact that Rabbi adds that everybody is capable of doing that. Doing what? Not to want Gan Eden, but to want the essence of Hashem himself. So again, for us, it doesn't apply in this way that is described here by these tzaddikim. But it does apply to us on our level to recognize what is the essence of Hashem. And even though I can be enjoying certain pleasure, doing other things, like the example we gave last time, if a person knows their shlichus, for whatever reason, I know that this is what I need to do. This is my shlichus in life. Even though doing other things feels more pleasurable, even spiritually, I feel that there's more to gain out of it. Nevertheless, if this is what my shlichus is, then this is what connects me to Hashem's essence. And that's the level, that's where we should be at. Always wanting to know, what is it that Hashem wants of me? That's our form of going into the King himself. So I think that I think we'll stop here because it just gets a little bit more complicated. And what I want to do now is just to go over all the chapters, review everything from the beginning, make a summary, and hopefully we'll get the most out of the Maimon that the summary is in these sheets, not in the booklet, but in the sheets. We just go through chapter by chapter, briefly, so you get a picture of the whole Maimon. It's in this booklet on page 49. Anyone that doesn't have it, we have a few extra ones here. Anyone that doesn't get? Here's one. Here's another one. I don't think we have any more. Maybe. Yeah, I have one more if anyone needs. No, I don't. Okay. So page 49. Let's go through this together. If you have any questions, stop me. I'm going to be going through what it says here. The Mimer began with the words of the Medrash, and the first question was, it appeared, actually we're not even going to get to the answers, but anyway, these were the questions. First, it appears that the main reason the Yidden are fortunate because they chose Hashem. Later, it appears that the main reason is because Hashem chose us. Number two, how can we use the term choose regarding Hashem? The term choosing can only be used when there are two things that are equal. There's nothing else that's equal, that we have to choose Hashem from something else that's equal to Hashem. And the same thing is, what does it mean that Hashem chose Bnei Yisrael when the neshamas of Bnei Yisrael are totally on a different level? So it starts off with the Medrash gives a mashal of a king and ministers. Some choose the ministers, this minister, some choose another minister, and the wise one chooses the king himself. I'll tell you one thing, the mashal you'll surely remember for a long time. They have to just remember the nimshal. The nimshal is that the nations choose to serve the sun or the moon or the constellations, and we Bnei Yisrael, we choose only the king himself. So he has two questions. One question, you don't need to be very wise to choose the king over the ministers. Number two, you don't need to give a reason that the ministers, they're not permanent. They change. The simple reason is because the king is greater than the ministers. That's why you should choose the king over the ministers. These were the questions. So now the Rebbe goes into, there are two levels to explain what the nations of the world are thinking when they choose the ministers, which is the stars and the constellations. One level is Chamra Lamora Tevusa L'Shakya. That line describes this approach, that they say the wine belongs to the master, but you say thank you to the waiter, which means they believe Hashem not only created the world, Hashem is running the world, but they believe that Hashem also gave some authority to these forces. Like a waiter, he's not in charge, he doesn't own the party, he doesn't own the food, but nevertheless, he has some input. And there's a lower level where they say, Hashem abandoned the world altogether. He created the world, and then he abandoned the world, and the stars and the constellations, they run the world. And this is like a king who appoints ministers, and he lets them run their part of the country, that they're in charge. Bnei Yisrael are wise that they recognize that everything in the world is run by Hashem himself, every detail. It's kigaras and biyad ha'chaitzim. It's like an axe in the hand of the chopper. It appears from the mashal, Eis Daled, that there's something to gain from the ministers. And nevertheless, the Pikach chooses the king because as the right thing. How does this apply to the Nimshal? The answer is there are two things to gain by receiving from Klippa. Remember these two things. One thing is from Gedusha you have to have bittul, and in Klippa you don't have to have bittul. The second thing is when you see from Klippa you can get much more, not measured according to the Avodah, not measured according to what you deserve. So this is the wisdom of the Pikach, that although to receive from the king, which is Gedusha, it requires hard work, which is bittul, and whatever you get is also much more limited. Nevertheless, they still choose the king because this is Kedusha and this is the Emes. Now the question is, why does each Hakat choose the king? So in the Medrash it says, the reason given is because the ministers can be changed and the king is not changed. What does that mean spiritually? although Klippa now is receiving so much more, ultimately it will be discontinued. And Kedusha will have much more in the future forever. So the fact that you see so much in Klippa only tells you that in Kedusha there's infinitely more than what you see in Klippa. That was the story of Rabbi Akiva when he saw Rome and all their pleasure. He said, if this is so much pleasure for those that violate Hashem's will, how much more pleasure is waiting for those that are fulfilling Hashem's will? Which means if this is pleasure that comes from the external part of Makif, there's infinite, much more pleasure that comes from the premise of Makif. So according to this would mean that Bnei Yisrael choose the king because of the benefits, just like the nations. The only difference is the nations look at the immediate benefits and we see the future. But the Medrash, it appears that Bnei Yisrael choose the king not because of benefits, but because he's the king. So how do we reconcile both things together? So the answer is, no, we choose the king because it's emes. The fact that the ministers could be changed and it's not permanent, that proves that it's not emes, because emes is something which is forever, doesn't change. That was the first explanation. Oizvav, according to the above, choosing the king is logical. It makes sense to choose the emes, even though a person won't have the benefits because it's not permanent. Because emes is permanent. However, the Medrash, it appears that the choice is not based on reason, but it's a soul decision. Chalki Havaya Omra Nafshi. That the neshama chooses because the neshama and Hashem are one. And that it's not the logical process that leads to it, it's just the essence of Hashem. So the answer is both are true. The choice is because the essence is connected, and the choice is also made because logically it makes sense. But the reason why logic arrives at this conclusion is only because of the soul's choice. Because the soul is bound with Hashem. In other words, logic itself, in its own right, would never arrive at this conclusion. And the reason is because the mind, the brain, is at the core of a person's identity. The person's yesh. And yesh wants to preserve its identity. So the desire to preserve its identity would subconsciously lead logic to arrive at a different conclusion. Not to lose its benefit and not to lose its identity. So in other words, seichel alone would never arrive to the conclusion that I should give up on all those benefits and, because of the future, but seichel would not lead to that. Seichel is always into self-preservance and get the best for self, and therefore the fact that the person can give up all that because it makes sense is because deeper down there's a connection to Hashem that no matter how many benefits and how much of benefit I can gain any other way, I'm not ready to give that up. So this part, Oy Zion, that's the part that gets very difficult at the end. I didn't get to that part. But at least we'll go into the part that explains how is that Klippa gets so much hashpah. There's a marshal of a king who made a feast, invites important ministers, important servants, but the food that was prepared reaches the simple servants and even the dogs. But this way of receiving is called, that's the marshal for B'derech Agav, that they receive their sustenance by the way, beyond the shoulder, not direct. That's not the purpose why the king made the meal. What's the nimshal? Hashem gives to those who fulfill his will. That's the ultimate purpose. When Hashem gives those who violate his will, this is like a person who throws it behind his shoulders. By the way, there's already a world and there's something going on, they're also getting, but Hashem doesn't really desire to give them sustenance. And then we made this chart here on the next page of the different levels in the mashal. The important ministers, they serve Hashem with love. The mashal of the important servants, they serve Hashem with Kabbalah Soil. The mashal of the simple slaves, they serve Hashem out of fear. And the mashal of the dogs, they don't serve Hashem, they're all heart. They just do whatever gives themselves pleasure. When you go into a higher level, the mashal of the important ministers are the spheres and the other example is the malachim, the angels. According to the above, a deeper meaning to the king, the pikach, choosing the king. It means he doesn't choose the spheres or the malachim, he chooses the king himself. What does it mean to choose Hashem over the spheres? The mashal of the Hashem. One walks into a palace and becomes so impressed and distracted with the beauty of the different chambers, and he gets stuck there and he never reaches the king, which means he gets distracted by the beauty of everything else around the king, near the king, but not the king himself. There are those that don't stop in the chambers, they're not distracted, but they go straight to the king. So the answer is because their Abba, their love is for the king himself, and they're not going to let the light of the king, which is like the beauty in the chambers, distract them. And now we have to just apply this to ourselves in our own little world. What does it mean? Maybe tomorrow, before we start the new mind, we'll go Ois Tes and Yud. Yeah, we'll do Ois Tes and Yud tomorrow. And then we'll start the new mind. Okay.
Rabbi Majeski, from the chart that you have before this,
Yeah.
like, that's how everything comes down? Like, it literally does come through the final step is the sun, moon, star. Like, so there's something to that, like, when other nations, like, saw that, it was because all the Hashgacha of the world does come through that channel.
70 angels, yeah.
But through the angels, then it goes to the constellation, sun, moon, and stars, like, it goes actually through there, always, the Hashgacha of the world.
Basically, these are the forces of nature, basically, represented by the stars, the sun, and the constellations. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Just what is it?